Good afternoon, everyone. I am recording on Screencast-O-Matic now while waiting for Auburn to put Panopto on my Canvas. So I realized that some of you are used to that, and I probably should have had that up, but it is not embedded in Canvas, and I was looking for it. So anyway, this is how we do it at LaGrange College. So I'm going to try this and see how it goes. If not, I will email the video to you guys, and I really apologize for any issues with that. So hopefully you have caught up. Everyone's doing really well on their assignments. I'm very impressed with your work. You are really good students and you're going to be great clinicians. And I'm impressed and I would hire you. So yeah. Your book, we've been talking about EMDR and yoga. And so the next couple weeks, I'm going to kind of synthesize all of that and maybe just pull in some stuff that I think would be helpful. Also, in your most recent reflection that's due next week, I ask for ideas for the end. I'm going to talk about licensure and getting a job and diversifying and certifications and things such as that I feel like will be really helpful for each one of you as you graduate, but also just looking for a few other ideas for things that you may want to talk more about. Maybe you've heard something that was really interesting and you just say, hey, I would love to know more about that. So also, all right, we did EMDR and yoga, so we did 15, 16, and now we're kind of moving toward the end of the book, 18, 19, with applied neuroscience, neurofeedback. I want to do a live neurofeedback demonstration for all of you. I don't know if we're going to be able to do that in person. It would be really hard for me to get to Auburn to do that, and then we'd have to find a room and do all of those things. But perhaps I can do one on the computer for you and do a live EEG. I have a couple of you who come to LaGrange, so maybe I could actually do it on one of the students from the class. Some of you come for internships. So just a thought to make it a little bit more personal, I could perhaps do a free neurofeedback EEG. I mentioned it at the beginning of the semester, so if you want to schedule that and us record it for class, we could do that. So neurofeedback is awesome. I do it. It is not for the faint of heart. I am very newly trained. I bought I'm recording in a Marriott because I just did a huge presentation for a chamber event. So I'm set up in here. If you hear some noise, I'm alone. But I got trained in 2020. I had some excess funding from the PPP that I applied for and got as a result of the pandemic. And I bought an EEG with some of that money, the extra money that I had, and very expensive equipment. It's about $20,000. And so that is a huge barrier for people to be able to, clinicians to be able to implement it. And the training is expensive. It's free when you buy all the equipment, but I trained everyone in the practice and I'm ready for certification. I've done everything I need to be certified in it. Do I feel like I'm ready for that? No. But it's expensive and I don't really need it. So I haven't done it, but so Bessel talks about neurofeedback in the book, and it's a brief overview, but the definition of neurofeedback is it's employed to modify the electrical activity of the central nervous system, including the EEG, event-related potentials, slow cortical potentials, and other electrical activity, either of subcortical or cortical origin. Neurofeedback is a specialized application of biofeedback of brainwave data in an operant conditioning paradigm. The method is used to treat clinical conditions as well as to enhance performance. So if you're like me, when you first learned about it, you had no clue what it was. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And if you've ever gone to perhaps a workshop or, when you go to conferences and they have the vendors, you may have hooked yourself up to one of the neurofeedback and played a video game with your brain. And you're going, how is this even possible, right? How is this spaceship staying up in the air? And so it is operant conditioning. It is actually not giving you any electrical stimulation, like say, there's transcranial stimulation and other modalities that are different. And this is an operant conditioning, like a learning. Your brain is learning to work in that optimum functioning while being measured and being rewarded. So it's just like operant conditioning that you have learned in your basic psych classes. So I move myself. Let's move me. Hey. Okay. So it's lengthy and costly to get trained. Biofeedback is far cheaper, and like heart rate variability and things such as that. They're all forms of biofeedback, but they're much cheaper. 4 full days of training. We spent 20 plus hours of consulting, and it was basically like learning to become a neurologist when you get trained. And I still don't know what I'm doing. But you have to purchase the equipment prior to training. We had just received the equipment in the office. And I mean, you really are going to medical school. You're learning how to use hardware. You're learning how to calibrate it. You're learning about artifact and interference with the hardware. You are learning how to put gel and what you need to do to troubleshoot the software and the hardware. So you've got this computer technology component, this medical hardware component, and then you've got this analysis of brainwave activity, an analysis of looking at brainwave activity on a screen and being able to ascertain what's happening in the brain. So it behooves you to have done some of the neurofeedback before either going to get it or practicing it or having it in office before you get trained. So you have a clue what the lingo is. I think sometimes that was really hard for us because we just kind of came into it, and a lot of the different, they call like the EEG has a name. And then the softwares have names like NewMind, and then there's different forms of EEG hardware. And there's 19 site, and there's 9 site, and there's 2-channel and things such as that. So sometimes, when you get into the field, especially when you guys first started, you probably were confused with the acronyms and the lingo of the field. And so this is a whole new language. And I feel like that's really important for you to kind of have that down. So perhaps this workshop or our presentation will help you with that. So an EEG is a graphical display of the electrical activity of the neurons in the form of brainwaves with unique patterns. It's an electroencephalogram. So it's just like you would get at the hospital or a neurologist's office. We use an EEG. That's the device, and what we do first is what's called a QEEG. And that QEEG is a quantitative statistical evaluation of the different wavelengths in your brain, the amplified and filtered EEG data. So there's wavelengths all over the brain, and they're alpha, beta, delta, high beta, gamma, etc. And those wavelengths are supposed to work in a certain wavelength, a frequency, 8 to 10 hertz, for instance, is supposed to be kind of in that area, in that region of your brain. And so what we do first is do we get this cap and we put it on your head, and that's what I want to show you guys. And we measure all over your brain, all those areas of overactivity and underactivity. So we know that like an alpha wave is certain hertz, a beta wave is a certain hertz. And we know that in that region of the brain, those hertz should be operating at that level. And so we have a 19-channel cap, and it's connected to the EEG, and it's measuring electrical activity in the brain. And then it is cross-referenced with a database and analyzed against all the other data. So to give you a basic normal, what normal should be based on thousands of different brain maps. So we map your brain with area eyes closed and eyes open, and then we get an idea of what areas of your brain need to be addressed. And some are probably healthy and some are not. And so it's used for assessment and treatment planning, and then you develop protocols. So perhaps your brain has really low in alpha in the front, and my brain is really high in alpha in the front. So my training program would be very different and would be calibrated differently for my brain. And so EEG neurofeedback, that's the actual operant conditioning. So we have a baseline measure, and then we're trying to measure your brain and hook you up to software so that your brain will learn to operate in a different level. And these are indicative of a ton of mental health issues. So, high beta waves is ADHD, et cetera. So they're analogous to, and research suggests that we know that, and it's evidence-based with a few disorders, but not all yet. And part of that is political. And, it's always a fight when something works, right? Like EMDR, there was a huge controversy because exposure therapy was so big. So it's always a challenge. This is where we're headed, though. So I kind of feel like if you don't understand and go with these brain modalities, that you won't be able to practice at some point, because this is where the field is headed. So we use we use special devices. So then after you have your brain map, and we give you your assessment, and it aggregates with all of the data from the assessment data that the clients have filled out. This is a beautiful report. Then we retrain your brain with neurofeedback. and we put electrodes on your brain. So we're going to train the prefrontal cortex and we want to increase alpha. We calibrate that so that you get rewarded when you hit the alpha wave we want you to hit. It's all wavelengths at once. I'm just trying to simplify it because when somebody taught this to me, I went to a couple of workshops and it was like, whoosh, right? And I try to make it easy because it's not as hard as people make it sound. People like to act like they're so smart sometimes and not get you to understand what's happening. If you've never done this before, it's confusing and it's lingo you've never heard. So let's say you put 2 electrodes right here. We're trying to increase alpha. We're doing eyes open. Let's say we're eyes open training. You're watching Netflix. You have to watch something educational and there's a filter over it. And the more that your brain is operating on a wavelength where it's supposed to be, the more of the show you see and hear. We also have headphones. Now, eyes closed, if we were training in this area of the brain for eyes closed, and the reason for that, let me say, and fall back here, eyes closed and eyes opened are different. When your eyes are closed, your brain waves, your internal landscape is different than your external relationship with the world when your eyes are open. And so eyes closed brain map and eyes open brain map are very different. We always get both. We do an EEG for both. And so your eyes closed could have tons of anxiety or not anxiety. When you open your eyes, etc., you're interacting with the world. So it's kind of your internal landscape with eyes closed and your interaction with the world with your eyes open. And so once we can brain train eyes closed, eyes open. And so we're trying to get you to that desired mental state, and you're getting rewarded by being able to see or hear more of the song, meditation, or the show. So your brain learns over time. So you train several times in that region, and then you're looking at all the data. And then the data is demonstrating for you that you are getting in the window that you want to be in. So then you do a few more to get your brain really like, okay, this is how we operate. You want to do it within a 3-hour window because your brain is learning. Your brain is malleable. It's learning. That's really interesting. We always do a fresh brain map in the mornings, and there's a whole load of things you have to do before you can do a brain map. Then we have a laundry list of things you must do before we can get an accurate assessment of your brain. And then we train you a series of 35 to 50 sessions into different areas of your brain using that neurofeedback. I could probably do this without even looking at this. I didn't think that's pretty good. Okay. Come a long way in since 2020. So neurofeedback is a computer-guided learning powerful instrument that detects and then feeds back information about the brain's electrical or metabolical fluctuation. The goal is to promote awareness and then get your brain learning how to operate in that area. The EEG is a graphical representation of electrical activity by the brain cells. Neurologists or us can carefully observe the brain's morphology for abnormalities that reflect clinical disorders. So we know that brain morphology, underactivity, overactivity of that electrical wavelength activity in the brain is indicative of clinical disorders, and they are aligned in that normal distribution with depression, anxiety, ADHD. So we know that if, I've got tons of beta waves here, I probably have trouble focusing. So that is that, and then it gives you a report. It says, probably have this. And it's been an interesting data tool for us as clinicians because it really affirms our diagnosis, which is really just a guess. I know people might not like to hear that, but it's an educated guess based on self-report and assessments with a pretty faulty tool. The DSM is there's a ton of negative press and issue with the DSM. I mean, look at the history. PTSD wasn't a diagnosis till 1980. And look at the history of what Van der Kolk talks about. So we do ourselves no favors by following that closely. So what it also can do is discredit a diagnosis. So it can also find a TBI, traumatic brain injury, which is something I'm going to talk about this weekend next. We have found almost every client has a traumatic brain injury. And so all disorders mimic TBI. And so that is a fantastically interesting concept to think, we are all walking around with minor TBIs and we didn't go to the hospital, but our brain is damaged. And that causes depression and anxiety and anger and explosive, issues, mimics ADHD. So all of this is really interesting as a tool in and of itself. The raw EEG data that we all learned how to edit is an amplification of the electrical activity, and each brainwave has a unique shape and morphology, like frequency. It's, like this or like this, and you can tell which one is which based on just looking at them, which is not an easy task. I don't know where I went. Okay, I hope y'all can still see me. Okay, something's happening. I tried to draw. I don't know why I hit that. Okay, look, this is what they look like. There, I'm moving me again. All right, so delta waves, look at that. They look, if you see a delta wave on a printout and you see a gamma or a beta wave, you're going to know those are different. You see delta waves, you see theta waves, alpha waves. You see that amplitude and frequency, getting that physics back in, right? You probably wish you never had to hear amplitude and frequency again, but here it is. So the science and what we do is important, and I'm getting off topic. I have ADD, if y'all can't tell. I need to brain train myself for it. You would think I would have done that, having access to free services, but I always have someone else using it. But this morning I did a talk for the Chamber Breakfast Brew in Troup County, and I had about maybe 40 company bosses, HR here. And I was talking about wellness in the workplace and trauma and the brain and all of the things I've been teaching you guys. And I was here over an hour after the meeting ended with the line of people. So it was powerful. And I say this to say I was able to talk about the science, and that gets people in to understand that this is real. And the pervasive mental health issues that we're having right now, and the hospitals are inundated, and everyone is struggling. And it's because of our low levels of stress hormones or high levels of stress hormones being released over time and wreaking havoc on our nervous systems. And so we can see this in the brain, and we can see long COVID. We can see the damage from COVID in the brain, and we can retrain the brain to work in the optimum functioning. So that was a side note. It's really distracting to look at yourself when you're talking. Okay, look at this. This is so cool. You guys are going to love this. So these are the different ranges. And so this is something we use right here. And so you see the range for delta is sleepy waves. Delta waves. Frequency should be 1 to 4 hertz. And positive, when it's in a positive frequency, you can reason good. You have like abstract thinking skills and sleeping good. Negative, brain injury, brain lesion, sleep deprivation. So when we see the delta waves off, we make an assumption that you are really sleepy. Theta, we have it should be 4 to 8 hertz. Alpha 8 to 12 hertz. So you see, they should be those. That's the range it should be in. So if I looked at your brain and your alpha was 28, and sometimes my alpha beta clients are 48 hertz. Okay. You can make some assumptions that something is wrong because if you know the brain is supposed to be working this way and it's 40 points higher, then you know you're on the right track. So it's great because every time you hook them up, you can immediately see what's happening. And they're like, how do you know I'm sleepy? How do you know I'm stressed? I'm like, your brain is telling me right now that you're really have a busy mind. And so tell me what's going on. Let's breathe. And then I can see the waves calm down. It's just really, really rewarding as a clinician to be able to kind of see that in real time. But look at all these connections: theta, ADHD, depression, poor judgment, navigation, alpha, depression, ADHD. So when your alpha is off, okay, you can be depressed. You can be, but when your alpha is peak, you are in synchrony with both hemispheres being in the same hertz. We want synchronicity in our brain. We want it to be synchronous. We relax when our alpha is good. Alpha 1, alpha 2. When we're not, when our hertz is off in alpha wave, we have mental fog, we have slow processing, and high anxiety. Our SMR, sensory motor rhythm, this is SMR right here in the brain. We start with SMR training to get the brain ready. It helps our clients calibrate and get prepared for the trainings. When we have issues in this region of our brain, we have sleep disorders, hyperactivity, beta. Oh my gosh, OCD, insomnia, migraines, perfectionism, anxiety, high beta, anxiety, insomnia, migraines, OCD, worry, gamma,